Against the backdrop of the trade war, Europe and China, which are under immense pressure, are strategically approaching each other. For the United States, this may not be good news. Since President Trump returned to the White House, there has been a dramatic shift in U.S. foreign policy from the previous value-based diplomacy to a transactional diplomacy guided by practical interests. Simply put, regardless of friend or foe, interests are paramount, and everything can be traded. This transformation is like a heavy bomb, having a profound impact on the global landscape, with Europe, the traditional ally of the United States, being the first to be impacted. In February of this year, at the 61st Munich Security Conference, U.S. Vice President Vance delivered a speech criticizing Europe's internal values regression and repeatedly questioning whether the U.S. and Europe still have a common agenda. In dealing with geopolitical conflicts, President Trump has completely abandoned the strategy of uniting with Europe to contain Russia during President Biden's presidency, choosing to bypass Europe and engage in direct negotiations with Russia, completely excluding Europe from the Russia-Ukraine ceasefire negotiation process, putting European countries such as France and Germany in an extremely passive position. Meanwhile, President Trump's attitude towards NATO has also caused concern among European countries. He believes that the existence of NATO is a unilateral effort by the United States to protect other member states, while Europe has been taking advantage of the United States. An internal memo shows that President Trump is even preparing to significantly reduce U.S. funding support for NATO. The collective defense principle of NATO has always been an important cornerstone of European security, and President Trump's negative attitude undoubtedly exacerbates Europe's security dilemma. But this is only the prelude to the rift in U.S.-European relations. And this round of trade war has become the last straw that crushes the alliance between the United States and Europe. On February 10th, President Trump announced a 25% tariff on all steel and aluminum imports into the United States. On March 26th, he signed an executive order imposing a 25% tariff on all imported cars. As one of the most important trading partners of the United States, the European Union has also become the main victim. However, this is just the beginning. On April 2nd, President Trump dropped the bombshell of equivalent tariffs and imposed a total of 30% tariffs on other EU goods. This series of tariff policies has dealt a heavy blow to the European economy. Morgan Stanley analysis points out that the European Union is one of the markets most affected by the equivalent tariffs imposed by the United States. According to the EU's forecast, this tariff policy may result in a reduction of approximately 100 billion euros in EU exports to the United States, and a 0.3% decrease in GDP for the Eurozone that year. This has aroused strong dissatisfaction within the EU. Even von der Leyen, the chairman of the European Commission, who has always been friendly with the United States, said that tariffs are a serious threat to free trade, and she vowed to take resolute and proportionate countermeasures. Quickly, on April 9th, the European Union voted to pass the first round of countermeasures against U.S. tariffs, imposing tariffs of up to 25% on 21 billion U.S. products. Although President Trump subsequently announced a 90-day suspension of equivalent tariffs, and the EU postponed countermeasures until July 14th to allow time for negotiations, it was difficult to complete the negotiations within 90 days due to unrealistic demands such as eliminating the trade deficit put forward by President Trump. On April 14th, after a 2-hour meeting in Washington with U.S. Commerce Secretary Lutnick and Trade Representative Greer, the European Commission's Commissioner for Trade and Economic Security, Šefčovič, stated that due to the unclear position of the U.S. side, it is difficult for the EU to determine its specific goals. Now Europe is totally in strategic passivity in terms of trade with the United States. How to get rid of this adverse situation has become an urgent problem to be solved by the heads of European institutional groups such as Macron, von der Leyen, and the incoming German Prime Minister Merz. When Europe faced this dilemma, China and Europe quickly engaged in dialogue, and high-level officials reached a series of important consensuses around stabilizing the industrial chain and promoting trade cooperation. On April 9th, Douglas Alexander, the UK Secretary of State for Trade Policy, and Tony Radakin, the Chief of Defence Staff, visited China, demonstrating the UK's willingness to deepen mutual trust and jointly resist risks with China. On April 10th to 11th, Spanish Prime Minister Sanchez visited China and reached important consensus in the field of agriculture. The two sides also agreed to strengthen cooperation in science and technology, innovation, and green development, and work together to promote green and low-carbon development. The frequent interactions between high-level officials in Europe and China demonstrate that both sides are rapidly building political mutual trust, laying a solid foundation for deepening economic and trade cooperation and resisting common risks. At the same time, Europe and China are rapidly engaging in communication and consultation on economic and trade issues. On April 10th, spokesperson for the European Commission, Revekis, stated that the EU and China have agreed to study setting a minimum price for electric vehicles manufactured in China, in order to replace the high tariffs imposed by the EU on Chinese electric vehicles in 2024. Both parties have made significant progress in negotiations in this field. From the above signs, it can be seen that Europe and China have been forced to strategically approach each other in the face of common economic and trade difficulties, and have made certain concessions for each other. For Europe, China is the world's largest manufacturing base, with a complete industrial chain and a huge market. In 2024, the trade volume between China and Europe will exceed 730 billion euros, especially with the growth of EU exports of automobiles and precision instruments to China, which can provide a key market buffer for manufacturing giants such as Germany. Through interaction with China, Europe can not only strive for greater discourse power on the international political stage, but also play a more active role in maintaining the multilateral trading system and promoting global economic recovery. For China, deepening economic and trade cooperation with Europe is an important way to break through technological barriers and stabilize foreign trade. As the main maker of global high-end technology and green industry rules, Europe can become a key partner for China's technological upgrading and industrial chain security. More importantly, Europe is not only an economic partner in China-Europe relations, but also a strategic pivot. Both sides can strengthen cooperation in the multilateral trading system and jointly respond to pressure from the United States. The essence of China-Europe strategic convergence is the rational choice of two multipolar power centers to build a stable pivot in turbulent times. This kind of cooperation is neither a romantic alliance building nor a pure exchange of interests, but a complex integration based on practical needs. This fully demonstrates that civilizations with different systems can effectively manage differences in competition and reshape order in cooperation. The strategic convergence between Europe and China will inevitably have profound impacts on the United States and the current global landscape in multiple aspects. For the United States, its relationship with European allies is becoming increasingly distant, which undoubtedly weakens its influence and appeal in international affairs. As a long-term ally and important partner of the United States, Europe has close ties in various fields such as international politics, economy, and military. The tense relationship between the United States and Europe makes it difficult for the United States to obtain the full support of Europe in handling global affairs as before, and it will also face more pressure in the international public opinion arena. At the same time, although the U.S. tariff policy towards Europe aims to protect its own industries, it has also triggered countermeasures from Europe, which not only damages the interests of related industries in the U.S., but also disrupts the stability of global industrial and supply chains, and will inevitably have a certain backlash effect on the economic development of the U.S. itself. From a global perspective, the strategic convergence between Europe and China has injected new impetus into the trend of global multipolarity. As important economic and political forces in the world, strengthening cooperation between Europe and China will help balance the international power balance, maintain free trade, promote the reform and improvement of the global governance system, and create a more favorable environment for world peace and development. The strategic proximity between Europe and China will have significant implications for the evolution of the global political and economic landscape that cannot be ignored. Unfortunately, it seems that the United States has personally facilitated the strategic convergence between Europe and China. The United States should find ways to ease its relationship with European allies as soon as possible, as this is in line with its own interests in the long run. Welcome to subscribe and share my channel. I will share the latest news and insightful perspectives here every day. See you next time.